Hello and welcome to HistoryPod. Today is World Fringe Day, where people around the world are celebrating the 70th anniversary of the world-famous Edinburgh Festival Fringe, which took place for the first time in 1947. HistoryPod is delighted to be able to celebrate World Fringe Day and the foundation of the Fringe movement in this special live recording from the Buxton Festival Fringe in the wonderful English spa town of Buxton in Derbyshire. I'm recording today's episode in front of a group of Buxton Fringe goers, and we're very lucky to be situated within a beautiful Victorian building that now serves as Scrivener's Bookshop on the outskirts of the Peak District National Park in England. When Sir Rudolph Bing, a controversial Austrian opera impresario, curated the first Edinburgh International Festival in the summer of 1947, he focused the programme on what he called the highest and purest ideals of art in its many and varied forms. This somewhat highbrow mission statement immediately drew criticism from many artistic groups who felt alienated by the festival's exclusivity. The fact that approximately £60,000 was being spent on an elite cultural celebration just 2 years after the devastating effects of the Second World War also seemed to ignore the fragile and perilous state of Britain's economic and social situation. Despite these concerns, companies including Glyndebourne Opera, the Halle Orchestra and Sadler's Wells Ballet converged on Edinburgh for the inaugural festival. However, another 8 theatre companies who had not been invited to perform took matters into their own hands. Although it's unlikely that they had conspired in advance to provide an alternative programme, the companies, who soon referred to themselves collectively as the festival adjuncts, benefited greatly from the audiences who had travelled to Edinburgh for the official festival. Consisting of 6 Scottish and 2 English theatre companies, this loose collection of like-minded groups caught the eye of many festival goers with what was referred to in a 1978 book about the Fringe as their missionary zeal. Since the major venues in Edinburgh were already in use for the official festival performances, these other companies were forced to find alternative spaces to stage their productions. These ranged from smaller theatres in the city to the innovative use of Dunfermline Abbey to stage a production of the medieval morality play Everyman. The Abbey's location, about 20 miles outside Edinburgh, led to a critic at the time lamenting its location on the fringe of the festival. This is the first recorded use of the term fringe in the context of the Edinburgh Festival, although it's important to note that it was written with a small letter F. This happened again the following year when the Scottish playwright and journalist Robert Kemp commented on the wealth of private enterprise that was taking place round the fringe of official festival drama. It wasn't until 1958 that the Festival Fringe Society was created to coordinate what the Scotsman newspaper proudly referred to as an official, unofficial festival. In the wake of this more formal organisation, the Fringe finally acquired the all-important capital F 12 years after the first performers converged on Edinburgh, and the Fringe was recognised as a festival in its own right. A key value of the Fringe is that it is an unjuried festival, meaning that there's no selection committee, and that anyone who can secure a venue is able to perform. This has led to some innovative uses of the available spaces, and where we're recording this podcast at the Buxton Festival Fringe is no exception. Scrivener's Books and Bookbinding Shop is situated on the high street of this ancient market town in a building that was originally a Victorian tobacconist shop. Consisting of 5 floors of rare and not so rare books, and even featuring a small Victorian museum in the cellar, I frankly couldn't imagine a better place for a history fan like me to be speaking to history fans like you. But why is Buxton the home of a festival fringe? Well, to talk about some of the history of the event in Buxton, I'm delighted to be joined by the chair of the Buxton Festival Fringe Committee, Keith Savage. Keith, thank you very much for giving up your time to come and talk to HistoryPod today on this most auspicious of days, World Fringe Day. Why do you think that the fringe movement has become such an international force over the past 70 years?
Well, first of all, Scott, many thanks for inviting me. It's a privilege and an honour, and I'll do my best to represent the World Fringe movement and not just the Buxton Festival Fringe. In answer to your question, without wishing to sound too pretentious about any of this, I think one of the things that characterises or defines humans as a species, if you like, is our desire to tell and to hear stories. And it's something which I think we do all of the time. But I think it's also something which we seek to refine in some ways and to tell stories in a way in which they are improved upon, in ways in which we can connect them to our own lives and as they get retold and repeated. And I think events like the Fringe, whether it's in Edinburgh, whether it's in Buxton, or whether it's in any of the other 200 places where fringes take place, is partly about people wanting to connect with it in storytelling. And for sometimes it's storytelling is a bit like this. It's people sitting down talking. Sometimes, last night, for example, I was at a comedy event with two youngish comedians, and they were drawing on their very particular life experiences. Only a few hours before that, I'd seen someone singing songs from the repertoire of Ella Fitzgerald, which had something to say about 20th century American life and American culture. Prior to that, we had the Shakespeare jukebox performing snippets from Shakespeare plays. So all of that, it seemed to me, is about people wanting to share their experiences, and the immediacy of being able to do that in front of a live audience, whether it's a large or a small audience, doesn't really matter. It's the excitement of being able to share and communicate, and I think that's why fringes have been so successful.
You've given a few examples of some of the stuff that you saw just yesterday, and there's a huge range of things. If we take a look at that original quote that Rudolph Bing said about the Edinburgh International Festival, he wanted it to be the highest and purest forms of art in its many and varied styles, which was seen at the time as being quite an elitist statement. Do you think that reflects the origins of the Buxton Fringe?
Well, the Buxton Festival began in 1979 when a small group of people recognised the potential of the Buxton Opera House. They set up an opera festival primarily. As it happened, some of the very same people recognised that was a rather elitist concept, and the following year some of the people involved in the opera festival created the first Fringe in Buxton in 1980. And it was a very small programme and a very mixed bag. We've got the original programme, and it includes clay pigeon shooting as an event, for example. And it was a deliberate attempt to provide something which you didn't need the money that comes sometimes with high level education to be able to afford. I mean, Buxton opera tickets, I think they don't go in more than about 75 quid, which sounds like a lot to many people, but if you're an opera buff, that's quite a cheap deal, really. But the Fringe, much of it is free, most of it isn't so expensive, and part of the rationale there is that art in all its forms, and the Fringe includes theatre, comedy, music, film, all sorts of visual arts. Part of the rationale is that everyone should have some access to the sort of storytelling that can happen.
And there is an enormous range of things that are going on here. I remember reading on one of your recent press releases that it's the largest programme ever for the Buxton Festival Fringe this year, yet it's taking place in a town of 25,000 people. What challenges does being in quite a small town put forward to the organisers of an event of that size?
Well, interestingly, venues is not a problem, partly because so many people in the town recognise the potential of the Fringe and throw open their spaces. So yes, you've already described Scriveners as a homely space for performances. Other events take place in Poole's Cavern, which is a show cave on the edge of town. Later on today, there's a one-off event that includes some aerial acrobatics in the trees and the plantation around Poole's Cavern. Most of the churches host events. There's an art trail next weekend in which dozens of people's homes will be used, the local library, the museum, pubs, clubs, almost everywhere you look is prepared to host a Fringe show. People just want to be involved, want to be part of it. And it's not really a problem getting people that want to perform on the Fringe, as you've indicated, Scott. This year we've got nearly 200 different shows and performances taking place. Hundreds of people will be performing in this year's Fringe. So that's not really the issue. But for a town of a population of a little over 20,000, even with the visitors we get during the festival period, the issue is providing people with audiences, I think. And I don't know what we can do about that. Our publicity, we think, is pretty good, but there's a finite number of people, and it does mean that some performers are working in front of really quite small audiences, which is dispiriting in some instances. And you want people to go away from the Fringe energised and excited, and if they've been part of an audience of 8, or if they've been playing in front of an audience of 8, it's difficult sometimes to be energised and excited. So that's the difficult thing. You want the range and variety that we have, but we also need to try to build audiences for all the people that are here.
And like Edinburgh, I know that the Buxton Fringe is unjuried. You don't censor performances. Does that ever create problems for you as an organisation in a town this small?
Well, the short answer is no. I mean, I've been involved in the Fringe for 25 years or so. I can only remember one occasion a theatre company were interested in putting on a play about Myra Hindley, and there was some resistance to that idea. I think people felt, what could a play about Myra Hindley usefully say? It would cause more hurt to the families of the children that she was involved in the murder of, and what could it usefully say about the mind of Myra Hindley? So that play actually in the end never went ahead. I don't think anyone ever said no, it can't happen, but there was a sense that it wasn't something that there was a desire for, if you like. But no, I mean, we've never, as you say, we don't censor, we don't select what some comedians say in their shows, what some playwrights put into their plays. I mean, I don't see everything that happens. There's bound to be something that will cause offence to somebody. Jerry Sadowitz was here last year. Offence is a hallmark of his work. If you're not offended by Jerry Sadowitz, he's failed in his task, hasn't he? So, I mean, that's part of it. But no, we've never said to anyone, no, you can't do that.
And you're always looking to embrace new things. You mentioned the venues, and here we are sitting in a Victorian shop recording a podcast. What role do you think technology is going to have on fringe movements in the future?
We're going back to the notion of storytelling, which we began with. I do my best not to be a miserable old what's name in any of this, but the first event I saw in this year's Fringe was a one-man play, The Unknown Soldier it's called. It's been very well reviewed, both in Buxton and wherever else it's been performed. But it's a 60-minute show by one man talking about his experiences of the First World War and his experiences immediately after the war, where his task is to clear up some of the battleground scenes. And there's part of me that thinks, in this sort of Twitter world, in a generation or two's time, will there be that many people that will be able to sit and listen to however consummate a performer someone may be for a whole hour? So I recognise the value of things that are short and sharp and are focused, but there is a part of me that worries that so much of our communication is becoming so small and bite-sized that it's going to be more and more difficult for performers to keep the attention of larger audiences for longer periods of time. So that's a negative side to it. On the plus side, there's a huge democratic potential in all of this. I'm also involved when the Fringe is not running in a local cinema project. 20 years ago, the idea that a group of volunteers with a budget of about £5,000 a year could run a cinema would have been completely unthinkable, because the technology would have cost huge sums. But because things are now much more affordable, much more portable, there's that huge democratic potential. So let's try to focus on the pluses. I think the technology that's at people's disposal means that more and more are able to become part of an arts movement and to share their ideas and to get them out there. It will no doubt change the nature of performance, and it will no doubt change the nature of the relationship between audiences and performer. But that's going to happen. Let's not be scared of it.
Keith, thank you very, very much for coming and joining us on HistoryPod to celebrate World Fringe Day.
Good luck with getting that down to 3 minutes.